Hello, puppies and kittens. I'm interviewing a Soviet-born Indigenous activist that I met at American Atheist National Convention in Phoenix, and this is Maria Vyushkova. And you said something interesting to me in Phoenix. Well, let's begin with a welcome. Thank you for being on.
Thank you for having me.
You said something interesting to me. You said that we were taught, here in America, that we were always taught that in Soviet times, the Soviets like had crushed religion, and they like prohibited religious belief and all of that. And you told me that you, growing up as a Soviet citizen, that you thought, or that you think now, reflecting, that the real problem was not that they were trying to get rid of religion in Russia, but that they had no separation of church and state, and that in fact they had religion, and that it's not the forced atheism that we were taught living in America all this time. Is that right?
Yes, that's
Let's
right.
open with that. I know you have a number of things you'd like to talk about, but let's hear about that first.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yes, when I came to this country, I discovered that the common belief here is that there was no religion in the Soviet Union, and that the religion, and more specifically Christianity, was totally banned and did not exist in the Soviet Union, and it was like an evil, godless empire. And also, the religious fundamentalists tend to use it in their debates against atheists, saying that the Soviet Union was an atheist country, there was no religion there, and it was evil, therefore atheism is evil, which is not true. But in reality, religion did exist in the Soviet Union, and churches did exist during the whole Soviet era. And people would go to the church, and actually, my husband was baptized, right? So, and moreover, you could go to a seminary during the Soviet time and become a priest. It was possible. But very few people here in the US know about that. So, the, um, the church was just controlled by the communist state. It was under total control uh, of both the government, the Communist Party, and the political police, the KGB, right? And of course, uh, the way the church operated was limited, and more specifically, they were discouraged or not allowed to recruit new members to the religious community. That was banned, and there were even laws against that. So it was like involving underage citizens into religious practices or religious rituals. That was criminally punishable, actually. But nevertheless, as it was discovered even during the Stalin's era in the 1930s, that the religious population turned out to be very stubbornly clinging to their beliefs. And for instance, the Soviet census, I don't remember the exact year, it was the 1930s, showed that a very significant part of the population was still religious and were not afraid to say this openly, though that census in the Soviet Union, it was not anonymous. Yet people would say they are religious. So they decided, instead of, they realized they failed in eradicating religion, and therefore they decided to use it. And they just decided to control the church in order to control that part of population which is still religious. And they used the church for political purposes each time they needed it. For instance, during the World War II, they discovered that communist ideas alone are not sufficient to motivate people to fight against the Nazis. and they used religion for that. Or then later on, they use religion, or more specifically official Judaism, in order to condemn Israel, right? During the wars Israel fought with its neighbors in the 1950s, 1960s. So they just use religion whenever they needed it. And their goal was not to destroy religion. From 1930s on, they realized it was not possible, but to control that stubborn part of the population still clinging to their religious beliefs. And actually, the real problem, therefore, was not the absence of religion, but lack of separation of church and state. And that problem was inherited from the Russian Empire, basically, where also Russian Orthodox Church was just one of the governmental departments officially. So, and this problem actually persisted after the Soviet Union collapsed. And the reason for that was actually, in my opinion, that Russian Orthodox Church suddenly faced a lot of competition from foreign preachers, including those from the US, preachers and missionaries who had they had like better training, and they had better theological training in many cases, because Russian Orthodox priests were complaining about that. And also they had much better like public relations skills, and they are much better at attracting people to their religious organizations. And in my opinion, Russian Orthodox Church just decided to rely on the government in order to still, to enforce its leadership or its prevalence among Russia's population, because otherwise they just feel threatened. And gradually, all those missionaries and preachers, they were, well, I wouldn't say they were expelled, but this activity gradually subsided. And I think it was just part of the governmental policies, actually, to establish the leading role of Russian Orthodox Church. And the propaganda would say that if you are Russian, you should be Orthodox. And many people in Russia identify as Orthodox, though they don't believe in God, according to the surveys, just because they're Russian. They think that Russian
we have a similar
Orthodox
problem in the United States. So the founder of the organization that I'm on the board, I'm on the board of directors of American Atheists, and our founder, Madeline Murray O'Hare, gave a speech wherein she said something along the lines of that most atheists don't realize that they're atheists. Most atheists identify as Methodist or some other Christian denomination because that's the culture they grew up in. And so that's what they still identify with, even if they don't believe a word of it.
Exactly.
And interestingly, here at the capital of my state in Texas, we have a Methodist minister who identifies as non-theist. So somehow he doesn't believe in God. He's an atheist, but he's a Methodist minister and continues to preach. I don't get how that works.
Yeah. And also it's interesting that it's well known, for instance, that certain religious denominations were indeed persecuted ruthlessly in the Soviet Union, such as Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're persecuted today by Putin's Russia, right? And the reason for that was very simple. So they only allowed those religious organizations to exist which they could control. And as for Jehovah's Witnesses, as part of their religious doctrine is they do not recognize any, worldly power, right, or any government. And that was the reason. So the Communist Party knew that there is no way they could put them under control and tell them what to do and use them. And the same thing happened actually to shamans, because my people are both Buddhists and shamanists. And shamanism is like an individual spiritual practice, which is infused with this spirit of personal freedom and resistance. And because of that, Buddhism was state controlled, but shamanism, they just tried to destroy totally, just to kill all the shamans and just eradicate all those shamanist beliefs, just
Okay, the next
because
thing.
it was
I'm sorry. The
impossible to institutionalize it as a structure controlled by the Communist Party.
Yeah, I think we might have a bit of a delay. I didn't mean to be speaking over you there, but I am curious about the next thing I think we need to cover is your background, because you only hinted at Buryat, and nobody knows what that is. Probably, I'm going to guess, in my audience, and they're especially not going to understand how it's both shamanistic, what you described as pagan, and what a lot of people don't understand what pagan means, certainly much less what shaman means, and then how that can be a subset of Buddhism, and how Buddhism could be controlled by the Soviet Union, which is also favoring Russian Orthodoxy. We're going to need some help. Can you flesh that out?
Right. So yes, I am Buryat by ethnicity. That's an indigenous group in Siberia, in the south east part of Russia. And if you can display the slide 1, our homeland is marked red on this big map of Russia. And by the way, I specifically looked for the map of Russia where the Crimean Peninsula is not marked as Russian, right? So, and because it's Ukrainian, and so it's marked red, and this place is called Buryatia, and we have also 2 like exclaves, part of bigger Buryatia, in the to the north and to the east from that area. So we are a Mongolic nation, and we are native to Siberia. And then in the 17th century, we were colonized by the Russian Empire. And our traditional belief was actually shamanism. It's our native religion. So it's basically worship of the spirits of the natural landmarks, or some objects like mountains and rivers, and spirits of the sky. And also Buddhism actually arrived later in the 17th, 18th century, when Buddhist preachers arrived from Tibet, actually from the south. Buddhism was introduced later, and then Russian Orthodoxy was introduced by Russians, and some were baptized by force, some by bribery, and some of them just because of some societal pressure, because you got some benefits from being baptized, because in the Russian Empire, in your documents, your ethnicity was not specified, only your religion. And if you are Russian Orthodox, you get some, benefits from that. So, and for instance, I think, as far as I know, it meant lower taxes, for instance. And because of that, many people just got baptized. That's why I have a Christian name, by the way. It's because many people got baptized without actually being Christian, or without even knowing what it means. They thought they are just getting a new name to get Russian documents, Russian papers. And they had double names. They have native name and they have a Christian name, and that's why the name Maria became very common. And that's how I am Maria, though I was born and raised atheist, right? That's the reason. Actually, it has no Christian meaning in my case. But nevertheless, I just want to emphasize that in the Soviet Union, the government basically tried to incorporate in the governmental structure and control all the religions which could be institutionalized as this type of state-affiliated structure. And that means they had some hierarchical structure, right? and you got some sort of, license to practice as a Buddhist monk or an Orthodox priest from someone else. But you don't need a license from someone else if you are shaman. You either are a shaman or you are not. It's an individual spiritual practice. So it was very different for different religions, because Russian Orthodox Church was state-controlled, Buddhism was state-controlled, and the head of the Buddhist denomination in our area, he actually had a portrait of the Secretary General of the Communist Party, Leonid Brezhnev, in his room, like a portrait of Brezhnev. So, but nevertheless, Buddhism was allowed to exist, because I personally, in the year 1988, I visited a Buddhist temple in Buryatia. So it existed. But they just tried to, discourage people from going there by requiring any visitor wanting to enter, they required you to speak your native language. And because the younger population spoke Russian, they just tried to cut off the younger generation and prevent them from becoming religious or to follow their traditions and things like that.
Now, see, this is where this gets us into another important argument. First of all, I want to agree that where you mentioned that a lot of these people were getting baptized, become Christian, and they don't even know what that means. I can personally attest there's a hell of a lot of Americans who identify as Christian and don't even know what that means.
Well, the point is they didn't even identify as Christians. They just got Christian names, Christian documents, but they still thought they were Buddhist or pagan. In my case, my ancestors were pagan, and they never even practiced Christianity or identified as Christian.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention is that that whereas in this country, as you've seen, there's an awful lot of dispute over the left versus the political left versus the political right, and again, most people don't even know what that means. So what they think that leftists are just some amorphous boogeyman. They're just the evil people, whatever, the shadowy figures of the night, whatever, those radical leftists, because you can't say the word leftist without saying radical in front of it, because otherwise you might, if you don't other as many people as you can that way, then people may not recognize how radical you yourself are. But the real issue, the bigger issue, and with all of this element of control over religious belief, over the youth, over everything, is the other axis of the political compass, the perpendicular axis between authoritarianism and libertarianism, not to be confused with the Libertarian Party, which is exclusively right-wing. I have to explain this because most Americans that criticize me have no idea what they're talking about. They are against a bunch of words that end in the word ism, but they don't know what any of those words mean. So
yes, that's a very common situation.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
So now I understand that that Buryat people, or that just in general Shamanic people, got into some kind of arrangement where they had to swear an oath. This is something I saw on the internet somewhere, that they had to swear an oath of allegiance to Buddhism, and I don't know if there's any truth to that at all. So I'm inquiring. So they have a shamanic belief, but they're considered part of Buddhism some way by some decree.
No, it was actually different. I would say it was the Orthodox Christianity, which was like state imposed. With Buddhism, it was, as far as I know, slightly different. And actually, as of today, most Buryats are Buddhists. So we are commonly, there is like a stereotype about us that we are Buddhist nation, but that's not true, because part of us are still pagan, like my ancestors were. So, but mostly, yes, Buryats are believed to be Buddhists, and this is mostly, for the most part, it's true, because especially the eastern part of our nation, Eastern Buryats, they are all Buddhists, they're very Buddhist, and from the mainland Buryatia, they are also, I would say, mostly Buddhist. But I'm from the northwest part. My family is from the northwest.
So you said that Russian Orthodoxy was state imposed?
Yes.
Now that matters to me, and all of the arguments that I have,
Yeah.
The whole reason that I advocate for separation of church and state is
Yes,
because
absolutely.
I
Because
know
of course
that
they try to Christianize the native population. So yes.
so can you give Americans an idea of what it's like to have a state imposed religion so that I can have more secular allies over here?
So well, it's just that just means that basically you are told that your native religion is bad, something is wrong with it, and they would just try to convert you, like I said, either by force or by pressure, right?
Like what you were
Economic
saying, if
pressure.
you're Russian Orthodox, you pay lower taxes.
Right, economic pressure and also some preference. Like, for instance, a famous Buryat scholar who studied Tibet and Tibet Buddhism, Gambazhab Tsibikov, when he was young, he was uh, so he graduated from the school, top of his class. But because he was a native and not Russian, and he was a Buddhist, he only got a silver medal, not a gold medal. And second, he got a scholarship to go to the university, but on the condition that he converts to Christianity. And he refused, though many people would agree, because like I said, they would just get baptized just for the sake of the paperwork, right? But still practice their own religion. But he refused, and he said, I don't know, I either won't go to the university, but I will just keep my faith. And because it's not just the faith, it's just the identity, it's also the identity, right? My native identity. And but he finally ended up going to the university, so it was like a happy ending story, because the wealthy merchants of who were also of native ethnicity, they just raised some money for him to still go to the university and to pay for his scholarship. But this shows that there was a very significant discrimination indeed, right? You had to be a Russian Orthodox in order to have a career, any kind of career.
Okay. And I get that. I mean, my ancestors also similar sort of a thing. The Christians come over all over Europe and Scandinavia, and they were offering to the Vikings, for example, land. If you just convert to Christianity, and we'll give you this land.
Right.
Okay. So you just want me to sign the thing, okay, so that you can call me Christian, and they still believe in the old gods. They're just on the books as being. They're on some books in Rome as being Christian now. And that was all they did. Sign their name, and then they get this land, and they didn't change anything about their beliefs. And then when they
Right.
go into conflict against the Roman Church, they're still fighting for the old gods.
Right.
And I don't understand what it is about these. I get for some kind of democratic reason, you need to be able to call in the numbers to say that your church is more powerful than another church because you have so many names on your roll sheet. But I've known an awful lot of Catholics who don't do or believe anything Catholic. They just were born into a Catholic family, and so the Catholic counts them. And I was born into a Mormon family, and I was baptized Mormon because I was 8 and didn't know what that meant. Like most Christians get into Christianity, have no idea what that means. But it meant getting off of their rolls, getting my name removed, required a formal letter requesting that they removed me. And then the response to that was a letter telling me that I had to acknowledge a signature that I am aware that removing myself from the Mormon religion endangers my immortal soul to damnation.
Interesting.
Because only Mormons are going to heaven, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's very characteristic of very typical of any monotheistic religion. And by the way, being of pagan descent, I have always wondered why Christians speak so much about being persecuted, especially, I mean, early Christians by pagans. That didn't make any sense to me because I know how tolerant we are to any other religion. If we learn about some other god we were not familiar with, we would just worship that god too, just in case, right? But those martyrdom and persecution stories about early Christians, it just didn't make any sense to me, and I have always suspected it was just self-defense on the part of the pagans, because Christians apparently tried to destroy or desecrate their sanctuaries. So that was the real reason behind that.
Yeah, interesting that Christians declare themselves to be the most persecuted group while persecuting everyone else
Right.
more than
It's
anyone
true.
else. Yeah.
Yeah.
If persecution meant that you were the true religion, then the pagans or the Jews would be the true religion, since they get this shit under the stick most often.
Right.
So you gave me a list of topics, and you wanted to discuss. Which one would you like to move into now?
So, well, we can talk about how Russia went from an atheist state to religiously indoctrinating kids in public schools. That's also an interesting topic.
Indeed.
And because this is what is happening right now in Russia, and I want to emphasize it's public schools. So they are religiously indoctrinating kids in public schools because
So in the Russian Federation,
Russian Federation, yes. Buryat is a
they're
part of Russian
teaching
Federation.
biblical creationism in public schools.
So it's called the Basics of Orthodox Culture, and it's like mandatory. It's part of the curriculum. So, and formally, actually, when this law was passed, it was written in the law that there should be options for other religions and for atheists. So there should be an option. So you could opt out of Orthodox culture, and you can take the so-called secular ethics instead, or you can take the basics of your own culture. But in reality, Russian schools are underfunded, understaffed, and in most cases, they just cannot provide a teacher for either secular ethics or other religion. So all kids end up studying the basics of Orthodox culture. And it strongly depends on the school, because the rules just do not specify that it shouldn't be religious indoctrination, right? And in most cases, well, it just depends on the school, depends on the personality of the teacher, right? On the personal preference and religious beliefs of the teacher. So, and in some cases, yes, it's outright religious indoctrination. And unfortunately, you cannot avoid it because it's part of the curriculum. So you have to be graded in order to graduate.
Yeah, yeah. I would much prefer that they just have a standard practice of teaching secular lessons, because even if you had an option, even if they could afford to do it and had the teachers to provide it, how does a child know which religion they should be involved in, or any? I mean, I was baptized Mormon, as I said, but I didn't identify as Mormon because I didn't know that I believed everything necessary to be a Mormon. And then I hadn't studied any other religions either. So how do I know that maybe there's another religion out there that I might more closely align with? And I didn't even know that the option of no religion was even available. So
Right.
why not teach kids what we can prove is really real? Teach them that, and then later, if they want to go deny reality and make believe something else, well, then they have that right.
Right. Yes, that's a big problem because, for instance, I have read some, surveys and some, how to say, some testimony from the young people who have been taught this course. in public schools in Russia, and they say that quite often the teachers say that, for instance, Jesus was the Son of God and he died on the cross for our sins, and they say it like it was true, and they don't put it like Christians say or Christians believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God and blah blah blah, but they present it as it was true, right? And this is also a big problem, actually. So it's not the basics of Orthodox culture; it's religious indoctrination.
And so, so they are teaching creationism, and they're not teaching legitimate science.
They do teach science, and I think, in my opinion, they just in this course, they typically, as far as I know, they focus on the New Testament and not on the Genesis. And I'm really glad that actual science is still taught, like biology and astronomy are still taught the normal way. Because
So they're able to say that they're able to say that other galaxies are hundreds of millions of light years
right.
away.
Yes, and this is actually thanks to the Soviet education system, because it's like the remains of the Soviet education system, whatever was good in that system. And but unfortunately, at those lessons, they just use or tell the kids the religious tenets as if it were like the truth and not just someone else's opinion, right? And as for the creationism, I wouldn't say they teach creationism, but as the biology course in Russia, it doesn't include any abiogenesis, right? So, or mentions it very briefly, and that's a problem because this might lead kids to believe that actually it was like intelligent design in the beginning, and then evolution kicked in. It's very common belief, actually, even among scientists in Russia. For instance, my biology, when I went to went to college, so I am a chemist, right, by training. And my biochemistry lecturer, by the way, she was absolutely brilliant teacher, but she was, well, so she believed in intelligent design. And she's told us, the students, that it's really hard for her to believe that there was no intelligent design involved. So it's a very common type of belief, like intelligent design, and then evolution kicks in, something like that.
The argument from incredulity fallacy.
Right.
I wanted to ask you another question. You said that you specifically chose a map that didn't include Crimea, and I know
Yes.
that there's two prongs to the reason you did that. Do you want to explain both?
So first of all, I am a member of an ethnic anti-war movement. So it was founded in the wake of Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And also I joined the Ukrainian protests in 2014 as well, right? And of course, I know that Crimea is a part of Ukraine, right? It was occupied by Russia, right? And that's why I chose this type of map. And I'm always this issue is very important to me, to just emphasize that Crimea is Ukrainian, it's not Russian. And second, also there is an ethnic aspect to that, because unfortunately, people of my ethnicity, the indigenous people, they are drafted to this war and sent to the front lines and killed in disproportionately high numbers. And actually, I wrote a scientific paper about that, and it was recently published in the Inner Asia Journal, published by Brill. It's Well, it's published by the Cambridge University. So
Share with me if you'll give me a link to that, I'd be happy to
Oh,
put that in the
absolutely, yes.
description below.
So should I just email it to you?
Yeah, just email it to me and I'll add it later
Okay.
when I get it.
So actually, I wrote a paper where we studied the ethnic composition.
But don't worry about it now. Just when you remember, send me the description. I'll be happy to, or send me the link, and I'll be happy to put it in the description.
Okay.
I want you to continue.
Okay. So I just well, we studied the ethnic composition of the Russian side casualties. So there is a group of volunteers which works on social media mining. And they find all the obituaries and all the the messages from relatives of the deceased, for instance, specifying that our relative has been killed in this war. And they have collected tens of thousands of records of the Russian side, confirmed Russian side casualties of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we analyze the ethnic composition. We read each biography, and we look at their name, place of birth, their relatives, their physical appearance to determine their ethnicity. And we found out that Asian people, Asian minorities die in this war in disproportionately high numbers. If you are of my ethnicity, you are 7 times more likely to die in this war compared to an ethnic Russian. If you are an ethnic Tuvan or Kazakh, you are also several times more likely to die in this war. And when they started drafting civilians to this war in September, we discovered the same disproportions. So people from Buryatia are drafted either 3 times or even 7 times more often, depending on how you count. But the truth is, you are more likely to die in this war if
What do you think
are
about the
minority.
Russian propaganda about this war?
So the Russian propaganda is actually, it's very weird. It's hard to believe. I mean, it's hard to believe.
And I'm not talking about Fox News.
Yeah. Well, I see a lot in common actually between Russian state television and Fox News. A lot in common. Very similar type of manipulations they use.
Yeah,
Very similar.
I know plenty of Americans who believe everything that you say in Fox News. And I've heard from Russians living in, because I was studying Russian language for the longest time until Putin ruined it. I think a couple years ago, I was right on the cusp of being bilingual. I was able to understand a significant amount, and then Putin just kind of ruined it. I have no motivation to learn Russian now at all.
Right. So unfortunately, it's a very powerful tool in the Kremlin's hands. Unfortunately, though their claims are totally outlandish, people tend to believe them because this is the only source of information. And when you hear the same message over and over again, 24/7, then you start to believe it, and that's the problem. And one of the reasons Putin used to justify his invasion of Ukraine was actually desatanization of Ukraine. So he said, our goal in this war is desatanization of Ukraine. Because according to him, Ukrainian government somehow was hijacked by Satan worshippers, and we invaded Ukraine in order to restore the order.
So my people in my own family who believe that the Ukrainians are not Satanists, they're Nazis.
Yeah, and another explanation,
which is funny because the people telling my family that the Ukrainians are Nazis are themselves perilously close to being Nazis.
Right. And actually, and they totally ignore the fact that Ukrainian president is Jewish.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is another accusation they use against Ukrainians, that they are Nazis somehow. Though,
I hear a
yeah.
similar thing again from people in my own family where they talk about, what the Satanists are doing, and I have to say, as a Satanist myself, that's funny. That never came up at any of our meetings.
Yeah, but in reality, actually, I can tell you that Nazis felt a lot more comfortable in Russia than in Ukraine. And actually, they killed a lot of indigenous people during the 2010s. And I personally, when I lived in Russia in the 2000s, I lived in fear because I knew that neo-Nazis can attack and kill me because of my ethnicity. And such things had happened to other Buryat people in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, to Tuvan people, and it was just very common. And one of the members of our organization was attacked and beaten. I think it was in Moscow several years ago, and that's why he left Russia after all. And so that was very common, and we just learned to live with that. And I personally suspect that at that time, Russian government, Putin's government, just somehow deliberately try to instigate such beliefs in people, and it secretly supported such organizations because certain investigations have shown that there are some very close ties between some governmental structures and militant neo-Nazis groups.
You mentioned Putin's government, but
Yes.
there's something people need to understand about that. Putin is the government. So most Americans don't know this either, but
Yes.
Vladimir Putin was president for a time, and he comes to the end of his reign. You can't be a president anymore. You've had enough courses in common or in a row. So he switches places with the prime minister.
Yes.
So he's prime minister now, and until he comes to the end of that term, and then he becomes president again.
He's a dictator.
Then when he gets to the end of his second collection or stream of terms as president, he simply writes out, or he changes the constitution of the Russian Federation himself. He changes the constitution to grant him, because now he has to become prime minister again if he wants to continue leading. So he grants, as president, he grants the prime minister additional powers because he knows he's about to become prime minister again, because he's just going to continue ruling Russia.
Yes,
and
exactly.
The entire Russian government resigns on the same day. How is Putin not the czar at this moment?
He is a dictator. He is a dictator, that's obvious, yes. And he calls himself a president, but in reality, he wants to rule like a czar. That's correct. And
but Americans don't know that.
He turned Russian Orthodox Church in his propaganda ministry, and right now, Russian Orthodox Church is worshiping Putin instead of God. Putin is their God, basically. So it's not.
Well,
really,
I've seen him topless on a horse. So yeah, yes. I get it.
So it's not religion anymore. It's like dictatorship propaganda. And the problem here is actually how it happened from the atheist state to indoctrination of kids at school, and to the church being like a propaganda department. That's the result of lack of separation of church and state, in my opinion. And because this problem persisted from the times of the Russian Empire. And throughout the rest of the history, it was like there was no real separation of church and state. So in reality, the situation hasn't changed. Just the purpose for which the state uses the church has changed, right? But and the governing ideology has changed, but the problem is exactly the same, right? It's just there is no separation of church and state, and it was like that in Soviet Union and in Putin's Russia as well. Yeah. So and I just wanted to focus on this because it's a very common misconception that Soviet Union was just a godless state. No, that's not the case.
Yeah, and thank you for that clarification.
Yeah.
You have 4 other slides we haven't looked at. We've got 15 minutes left, so I want to make sure that we cover all of these.
Yeah, absolutely. So could you show this slide too?
Which one is that?
With people dressed in ethnic clothing. Yes. So this is this picture was taken during traditional summer festival, and this is what our traditional clothing looks like, traditional outfits. So we're, like I said, we're a Mongolic nation, and and this is what Buryat people look like. This is what the weather like in June and July, and this is how
Oh,
our
so there's
tradition.
a moment when it's not all white.
Exactly, yes. So we have winter like October through April, but
I
yeah,
have I have a breeding pair of Russian rat snakes, and I don't know what
yeah,
the indigenous name for those are. If you know, I would love to hear it. But one of the interesting things that about them is that because they come from Siberia and Mongolia, they're completely different than everything else I
they are.
have, because they have evolved for extreme winter conditions.
Exactly, yes. And
Yeah.
actually, we don't get that much snow. And that's the problem because it's extremely cold, but there is no snow, which provides some insulation for the plants. And so, and the winters are really harsh, though there is relatively little snow.
Yeah.
But nevertheless,
What do you see as a winter? Because I've met, in studying Russian, I've met people from Siberia, Yekaterinburg, for example. Somebody told me that they had a Tex-Mex restaurant in Yekaterinburg, and I'm
yes,
just
yes,
having a
of
hard time
course. Yeah,
wrapping my head around that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And we had one in Novosibirsk as well. Yes. It was my favorite. It was called Amigo. Yeah.
Nice. Continue, please.
This is the traditional summer festival. And the next slide, there is like a Buddhist temple. So it's a traditional Buddhist temple in Buryatia. So because the significant, probably the most of part of the Buryat population are Buddhists, like Tibet style, Mongolian style Buddhism, and also like my ancestors were shamanists, and there is a picture of a shaman on one of the
The shaman,
slides.
that was this one?
Black and white, yes. It's an old historic picture of of a Buryat shaman. So it's our traditional belief, and my ancestors were more pagan rather than Buddhist. And so a very important topic I wanted to talk about is actually, I work for a Catholic university. I work for Notre Dame. I'm a chemist, I'm a PhD chemist. And I used to feel very comfortable working there. My colleagues from the Catholic community were very nice people. I felt very comfortable. But until recently, because in November 2022, several months ago, the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, actually insulted my nation. And he accused people of my ethnicity of committing the worst war crimes in Ukraine. Like
So you've
blamed
already
them.
verified the statistics that that your people are disproportionately being killed in this
Yes,
war, and that this war is being driven largely by propaganda, where they're declaring the Ukrainians to be either Nazis according to Fox News, or they're Satanists according to Putin. But regardless of the fact that the president, the Ukrainian president, is a Jewish comedian,
yes,
and just doesn't fit the propaganda at all.
right.
But
Yes,
somehow it's your fault and not Putin's fault.
exactly. Yes, yes. So Pope Francis, if you show the last slide with the Pope, uh, so he said that it was in his interview to the American magazine, the Jesuit journal, and actually he said that it's not Russians who are to blame and not the people of Russian tradition, but it's like those minorities, like non-Christian people, like Chechens and Buryats. Chechens are Muslims and Buryats are Buddhist and Shamanists. So obviously he is using this criterion. So he wants to blame non-Christian people, and he portrays them as those people who committed the most atrocious crimes in Ukraine, and also he tries to blame them and avoid blaming Mr. Putin, because in my opinion, Pope Francis just wants to start some peace negotiations at some point and politically benefit from that, but he wants Mr. Putin to still want to talk to him, right? So Putin should be still talking to him, being on good terms with him. And that's the reason why he avoids blaming directly Mr. Putin and blaming Russians, because he is afraid of antagonizing the Russian Orthodox Church, which is just a Russian propaganda ministry at this point.
Okay, so the Catholic Church is the most powerful religious organization in the world still to this day, but he's afraid of a single dictator.
Yes, exactly.
There's only been one other time in history that I can remember that happened.
Exactly. Yeah. A very familiar situation. Right.
Indeed. And I don't want to draw too many comparisons because you end up sounding paranoid if you do. But at the same time, this Pope, because of demands for social justice, this is like the nicest Pope historically that I think the Catholic Church has ever produced. They had to get this guy because the previous one was literally a Nazi youth who was who had to resign when it was found that he was covering up and moving people around and trying to protect child molesters.
Right.
And that previous Pope, I don't remember what his official name was. I prefer to call him
Benedict. Right.
I know, Pope Benedict, but I prefer to refer to him as Darth Ratzinger.
Yeah. So, but I want Pope Francis to be even nicer, and I want to get him to apologize, because what he said just was not true. Because we did a lot of research on this topic as part of our ethnic anti-war movement. Because if that turned out to be true, okay, we would acknowledge it. And we would, but in reality, it turned out, first of all, we were the first indigenous nation to publicly condemn the war in Ukraine and the war crimes. We're literally the first to do that. And second,
I know that the Catholic Church has apologized for some of the things that it's done wrong to certain people. But the only example I can think of is Galileo, and that implies that you're going to have to wait 300 years for that apology.
That's true. Yeah, unfortunately. So, and moreover, what was even more insulting to us is he didn't even know how to spell the name of our nation. If you look at this slide, it's spelled incorrectly. The Chechens are spelled correct, but the Buryati, we are Buryats in English translation. In the English name for our nation is Buryats, and he used the Italian translation. Apparently, they didn't even know how to spell the name of our nation, but they still that didn't prevent them from accusing us.
Yeah, just to keep things in perspective, of all the things that you can complain about and should. That he lives in Italy and used the Italian spelling is probably the least of them.
Right, but it is an American magazine, right? And the editors apparently didn't know that either. That's
okay. Gotcha.
Outrageous.
Yeah.
And so we found out what was the reason for the ground for these accusations. So actually, when there was a mass murder of civilians in the Ukrainian city of Bucha, Kyiv region, in the March 2022. Actually, according to the New York Times investigation, only one of the people involved had a Buryat name. Only one person, literally. And the rest of those Russian servicemen, they are obviously non-Buryats because they're from the city of Pskov. The city of Pskov is in the far west of Russia. It was many thousands of miles away from Buryatia. And he just ended up, that guy, Buryat guy ended up there just because when he was drafted, somehow he got sent there. But it is very unusual. It's extremely unusual for people of Buryat ethnicity to be drafted to that military unit, just because, first of all, geographical position a huge distance between these two regions, and second, because Buryats are typically drafted to tank unions and not to the airborne units. So it's obvious there was just one person, but based on one person, he accused the whole nation.
Gotcha. Yeah. Maria, I don't know where else we can go from this. I'll give you another minute if we haven't covered everything that you wanted to say. But so far, I'm impressed with your recounting here, and I want to thank you for your involvement. I'm a little surprised. I'm not at all surprised, really, that if you look at the history of any indigenous people from anywhere, you always see the story. Eventually, it gets told of some invading culture that tries to kill off all the indigenous and replace everything, to wipe out all of their religious traditions, burn all their books, break down all their statues,
Yes.
rewrite their language in some cases, like what the French did to the Vietnamese and so forth. And it sets us a terrible precedent. We should know what the practice is going to be in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what's prescribed in Deuteronomy, actually, if you read the book of Deuteronomy, right? And it says explicitly, destroy their sanctuaries, break down their statues, and cut down their groves and things like that. So yes, unfortunately, we should just treat the Bible as a work of literature, right? Work of ancient literature and some ancient legends which explain the origin myth for Jewish nation, but we shouldn't take it literally in the 21st century, right? And by the way, I am a Bible study enthusiast because as an atheist, I want to know what I'm up against. And I read my Bible every day in 3 different languages because I speak 3 different languages, and it's really nice to compare. So yes, and I got very interested with the TST, and I recently joined the Satanic Bay Area because I live in California. So I have attended 2 events already. And you are I'm probably the only indigenous Siberian Satanist you've ever seen. Well, I'm very much interested in the satanic atheism, right? Because, for instance, I'm very much for women's reproductive rights and for LGBT. Again, for supporting LGBT and especially trans people and stuff like that. I think it is very important, like trans rights are human rights, and abortion is medical care, and things like that. I think it's extremely important, regardless of who you are and where you live, right? And also, I would say, though I work for a Catholic university, but Satanists were the only religious group who were willing to listen to me when I had that issue with Pope Francis, right? And I'm extremely grateful to them for that. So I think it might be nice to actually start a satanic group at Notre Dame.
I love the idea
That
of
would be fun.
the Satanic Temple of Notre Dame.
Yeah. And well, I think it would be just it will help me to attract some attention to that Pope Francis issue. Just because if they ask me why did you become a Satanist, I would say Pope. Actually, I was thinking at one point working at Notre Dame and feeling comfortable among my Catholic colleagues. I was thinking about getting baptized and becoming like a cultural Catholic, just joining their community and being a part of it. But when I learned that at the ceremony of baptism, you should acknowledge that you do believe that God created the earth and the sky in 7 days, and Jesus was killed and resurrected on the 3rd day, I realized I cannot possibly say that. And this is exactly the same reason why I never, though I was born in the Soviet Union, I never joined the Communist Youth Organization. Everyone else joined, but I didn't, because I just realized I cannot say that oath it would be dishonest because I don't believe in Comrade Lenin and his ideas. So I decided, and I was the only one who did not join. And it was the same situation with, Roman Catholicism. And if they asked me at the university why did I become a Satanist, I'd say like I was thinking about becoming a Catholic one time, but Pope Francis insulted my nation, and the Satanists were the only religious group who were willing to listen, to emphasize, and support me. And this is true. So, and Satanists, like atheist satanic groups, they are, way more. They are in much better alignment with the values of peace, of humanity, of human dignity, and equality compared to the Catholic Church, unfortunately.
Indeed. Maria Vyushkova, thank you for being on.
Thank you. My pleasure.